what I hadn't realized is that the Agile conference is basically part of the kindness economy. I love the fact that you're giving back to the community. And yeah, so I think I'm in the right place to give my talk. I've been a trend researcher and futurist for about 30 years. So I have quite a lot of experience. And I do notice that I get the same questions quite often. One of the questions I get a lot is, which trend should we follow? That's a bit of a tricky question. And I think sometimes what's really behind this question and what people really want to know is which trend will make me a lot of money. That's a bit of a tricky question to answer. I can't say I have the answer to that. Perhaps, if someone pays me a lot of money, I'll think of something, but that's one of the questions that tend to get whispered to me in the breaks at a conference. Another question that I get to hear a lot, or I've heard over the years, is what can we predict best? And that's another one of these very tricky questions. What can we predict to a high percentage? Interestingly, there's a couple in America. They're psychologists, and they work as marriage guidance counselors. And they say that they can predict within 1 hour if a couple who come to them are going to stay together or not, and they're going to predict to 90% correct whether this couple will stay together or not. The problem is they don't have many customers. Not many people want to go with this kind of predictability. But what we do, we don't give the people such a hard time. What we do is we work with the big trends in society, and we have been over the last 30 years, the so-called megatrends. And I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of these terms: megatrend urbanization, megatrend globalization, silver society, connectivity. These are trends that we're used to hearing about. And these are important because they are the social demographic changes, the big shifts in our society. And they accompany us for many years, and they're going to stay with us. But I think one of the problems is when we think about trends is we tend to think in a very linear fashion. Linear thinking is a bit of a trap. I mean, if you think about a trend like, I don't know, flares or drain pipes, you might think, okay, luckily that's not going to stay for a long time. Or if you think about, people say, when you think about a trend, they say, oh yeah, do buy chocolate. That's a trend. So these trends are small consumer trends, and the mega trends are the big important trends in our society. And this kind of linear thinking about trends isn't very useful when we want to think about the future. What we need to think about for the future is, how do these trends impact our society, and what happens when they impact them? So what we see is that every trend, even sometimes the smaller trends, but particularly the big megatrends, create a counter trend. A trend creates a shift and a change in our society, and that creates like a counter trend, a Gegentrend in German. And I'll give you a few examples so that you can understand this dynamic. Let's look at a classic one at the moment, globalization. We've been talking about globalization for a long time. Now we're seeing a kind of renationalization. You could almost say, if you look at a particular country, you could say almost recolonization attempts. New imperialism as a counter trend. What about megatrend health? We're all getting very conscious about our health, but at the same time, we've got increasing obesity in our society. A lot of bad food, a lot of burnout. If we think about what's happened with feminism as well, we're seeing a backlash, we're seeing misogyny, we're seeing the comeback of trad wives, we're seeing a lot of things on social media with kind of what we call neo-machoism. There you see again that this trend of feminism has created a bit of a counter trend. Another big trend, individualisation. We live in a very individualised society. And the more individualised we become, the more we need community, the more we need Gemeinschaften. What about ecology? Ecology and sustainability is sort of getting a little bit out of fashion. People are so sick of hearing the word sustainability. And we're seeing the counter trend. People who are sort of clinging on to their petrol cars, for example, their diesel cars. You can still drive how fast you want on a German autobahn, which I find amazing still in these times. But that, that's not going to shift. We're seeing a big movement for people who are saying the climate crisis isn't real. If we look at the trend to digitalisation, we all know we're not going to be able to do without digitalisation, but what we will need is the counter trend to help us deal with it, to help us balance it out. The counter trends create a kind of balance. Digital detox, revenge of the analogue. Think of the comeback of records, think of notebooks, think of digital detox. People are really talking about banning phones for children under 16. We see it in various countries where they're starting to do it. That is the counter trend. Think about work, new work. We had this big movement for new work, flexibility. Now there's this big trend to getting people back to the office. Anti-diversity. We had this wonderful time of the DEIs. Now people are saying, in America particularly, we've got to get rid of them. The counter trend. But all is not lost. I mean, it does sound a bit depressing sometimes because some of the counter trends are a little bit negative. But there's another element and there's another process that happens with these trends, which is really interesting. So you have a trend, you have a counter trend, and that creates a kind of energy, a kind of dynamic. And out of this kind of meeting of trend and counter trend, new trends emerge. This is what we call the recursion principle. And the trends that emerge out of it are what we call a future synthesis. So it's like a mixture of a trend and a counter trend. Think of flexitarians. How many of you here would say you're a flexitarian, that you eat meat? Yeah, quite a few. Okay, well, no, not that many, actually. I'm a bit depressed. I thought there'd be more. Anyway, but flexitarians are the people who may be a vegetarian, but also eat meat. So that's the kind of combination. So you can see it on lots of different levels. And I'll give you a few more examples. So let's have a look at Megatrend Silver Society. What does that mean? We're in a society, and if we look at the demographic pyramids, we see that we've got an increasing amount of older people in our society. What we see is that we're living longer than ever before. In Europe, our life expectancy for women is around 83 and men around 78. So it's quite good. It's definitely got better. If you want to live a bit longer, you should go to Switzerland. Women live approximately till 86 and men till about 80, sort of on average. The other tip I can give you, if you want to live longer, when men are married, they live on average 2 years longer. But the only problem is if women are married, they live on average 2 years less. So, ladies, you've got a choice. My problem is I'm now married for the second time, so I'm thinking that's going to be 4 years less. So either don't get married too often or just don't get married. So what we're seeing as we're living for longer, is that we're fighting with every sort of bone in our body, if you like, to stay younger as we get older. And this is what we call the down aging. This is the trend, the counter trend, and this is what comes out of it, our attempt to down age. That means if you look at the last generations, we are almost 7.5 years younger mentally and physically than the last generation. So if you compare yourself to your grandparents, you will be 15 years younger physically and mentally than they were. at the same age. I mean, at some point it's not going to work anymore, mathematically, obviously. But at the moment, this is what the trend we see. And I mean, sometimes we think down aging, is that really a trend? But if you compare pictures of typical 40-year-olds in 1940 and then 40-year-olds today, you really see this down aging effect. And if you look at older people on social media, you really see they're really trying to stay young. It's almost a bit embarrassing. I'm embarrassing my kids by trying to stay young by going surfing. They get really embarrassed with that. But and this lady up there, the old lady with the spray can, she belongs to a group called the Graffiti Grannies in Lisbon. And they go through the city with their spray cans painting. She's 90. The police don't go anywhere near them, of course. They don't touch them. But can you imagine? I mean, normally you think of people with spray cans as sort of 15, 16-year-old boys, and this is a group of older ladies. So you really see that our whole, sort of mental space has changed completely as we get older. So let's talk a bit about the kindness economy. The kindness economy, for me, is also a form of, if you like, the result that's come out of a trend and a counter trend. I like to try and think positively about the future, or what I say I'm a possibilist. I get often asked, am I an optimist or a pessimist? I think those are a bit too polarized, these two things. And I like to say I'm a possibilist. I like to see the possibilities, the Möglichkeiten for the future, what we can do, where the potential is. So the kindness economy has come out of the thinking that we're coming out of the industrial age thinking of this pushing for just growth for consumerism. But at the same time, we're in a society where we have new values, where we're thinking about sustainability, not just ecological sustainability, but social sustainability. And out of these, if you like, we're coming to what I hope is a kindness-based economy. And what we're doing is we're moving away from the old, if you like, linear thinking. The old classic economy starts with profit, and then we do something for the planet, and then maybe we do something for the people. What the kindness economy does is it turns it on its head. It says, let's put people first. We can do something for the planet, and we can still make profit. People are quite scared of this term, the kindness economy, because they think kindness and economy, they're two terms, they're two words that don't really fit together. How can the economy be kind? And in fact, it's not a new idea. A lot of philosophers and economists have been talking about this over the years. Adam Smith, Scottish economist and philosopher, wrote books about what, he didn't call it the kindness economy, but his whole moral thinking went in this direction. And you might ask yourself, why are we thinking about it now? It's taken a long time to get to this point, I think, where we really can see a picture of what the kindness economy can be and can mean. You might also be wondering, not just why are we talking about it now, but why is there a picture of a bottom on the screen? My son Julian, by the way, did this picture, so I can blame it on him if it looks rude. So there's this wonderful proverb, 16th century proverb in England, and it says, the higher an ape climbs, the more he shows of his ugly side. Je höher der Affe klettert, je hässlicher wird das. And I think it's quite, if we think about a lot of business, if we think about people who are in power at the moment, I'm not going to mention someone whose name begins with T, but I think we can see the effect of what power does. The higher he's climbing up his ladder, the uglier it's getting. And that happens in a lot of companies. And I ask myself, why are so many companies and bosses unkind? And if you talk to people, I mean, they don't really want to tell you, they don't want to admit they're unkind. But if you read between the lines, it's basically, they think they don't have time to be kind. It takes up too many resources. They want to keep the hierarchy. They want to show leadership. and it just gets things done quicker, to be unkind, to be rude. And I had the feeling a couple of years ago that we're really at peak unkind economy. That was when a lot of the scandals were coming out about Amazon, Musk, how they were treating their workers. We were seeing a lot of disappointment in the workforce, people rethinking where they wanted to work, what kind of values they wanted to work for. There was a period of the Great Resignation where people were saying after the pandemic, well, do I really have to put up with these kind of working conditions? Another reason why we're looking at the kindness economy is because we're looking at the more human solutions that come out of the digitalisation. Again, the counter-trend. The younger generations, they've got different values, they've got different priorities when it comes to work. They're also looking for different workplaces, different work conditions. If you look at the younger generation, Generation Z, they're not so interested in money. What they want are good working conditions. The pandemic brought us to the point where we would rethink a little bit how we want to work and how we want to live in the future. So what is a kind company? What makes a company kind? There's so many different ways to have a kind company, and there won't be a company that's just perfect. There'll be some that are a little bit kind, some that may be quite a lot of kindness. You don't have to be perfect, but I think we can orientate ourselves on the idea that there is potential. And one of my, in my book, I talk about the person who really inspired my book, Yvonne Chouinard from Patagonia. And when we think about Patagonia as a company, we just think, oh, eco-Kleidung, eco-clothes. But actually, what he was much more concerned with when he started his business was to be a kind company. His idea was to say, I can create a business and do good things and make a profit without losing my soul. He's written a fantastic book called Let My People Go Surfing. When he set up Patagonia in the 70s in California, he wasn't interested in working all day from 9 to 5. He was a surfer. And I don't know if any of you have ever surfed, but you can't expect the waves to be perfect at 6 p.m. when you finished work. So he said to his workforce, if the waves are nice at 2, I'm going to go surfing. I will come back and finish my work. And you can all do the same. So he created flexibility. He created a whole different, if you like, moral. He created a whole new workspace where people could come and go when they wanted, as long as they got their work done. He also was one of the first people in California to offer a kindergarten, so a creche for his workers' children for free. And when all this news got out that he was producing, that he was creating a whole different workspace and a free kindergarten, other companies in the area called him and said, do you really have to do that? Could you please not tell everybody? Because everyone will want that in our company too. But he carried on. And this is a classic example of a company that could be kind and make an incredible profit. His company, Patagonia, is valued at over 3 billion today. And he's not the only person who tries to hold to his good values. Bruno Cucinelli, he's, you would say, a humanist, believes in capitalism. He says he needs to make a profit, but wants to do it with ethics, dignity, and morals. It's his dream. I mean, I have to say, his jumpers, his pullovers, they cost around 2,000 euros. So you can believe in capitalism when you're charging that much, but he has created for his workers a whole village. It's called Solomea, which means the Hamlet of Harmony, where all his workers come. And he supports them. He gives them almost a 2-hour lunch break so they can have a siesta. Of course, you have to in Italy. But the main point was that he wanted a happy workforce. He wanted a workforce that were motivated to come to work and to do their best. On the other end of the scale, we have in Germany a company, Trigema. And okay, these clothes are a lot cheaper, say maybe a jumper is maybe 50 euro, but the whole work ethic there and the management principles are to say, I want our workers to be so happy that when they come home, their children will think, oh, that's a good place to work. And they're so sure of their reputation, the company, that they guarantee the children of their employees an apprenticeship, which I think is quite a bold move. We can look at all sorts of different companies, but I wanted to look at something a little bit, different, like a supermarket, to say, can a supermarket be kind? Can a supermarket chain be kind? Now, this is a chain in Holland. And in Holland, they noticed that, like a lot of European countries, we have a lot of very lonely people in society. They noticed in their supermarkets that older people would come in and want to talk to the cashiers, because that was the one time of the day they had any connection to another person, where they actually exchanged some words with another person. Because we have a very individualistic society where a lot of people live alone, especially older people. So what they did was they set up what's called kletkasse. And a klet means like to gossip. And the idea is that you can stand there while you're paying for your goods and you can talk to the cashier for as long as you like. And she will talk to you. And everybody's happy. So the cashier is happy because it's not so boring. The people who are buying there think it's great. And then a queue forms and all the people in the queue then start talking to each other. But the nice thing is that word gets around. So all the older people then tell their neighbors and everybody goes there. So they think about people first, but they still get their profit. Then we have big companies, on the other end of the scale. We think of energy companies. We have so many problems getting through to hotlines. And this is one company in the UK, 100% green energy. It's one of the big energy providers. And one of their key promises is that they have good customer service. So it means you can actually call and you can actually speak to someone. It's not a bot. It's a miracle. That is their idea of kindness, which I think in these days goes quite a long way. So if we want to just compare a little bit, just in order to get a perspective on the difference between the classic industrial age economy and the kindness economy, we're coming away from this idea of just me, when we think about a company and the values. It's coming to me and we. We're moving away from just serving customers to serving customers and a community. It's not about short-term thinking, it's about short and long-term thinking. We're not buying from a company as a consumer, we're buying from a company, but we're also buying into their values, their kindness. And you have to think more, instead of having passive consumers today are much more conscious about their choices. 50% of the Generation X research a company's values before they buy something or before they decide to apply for a job. So the future was always about just value when it came to the economy. Today, we're talking about value and values. So we need both. One of the other things I came across was the idea of a kinder workplace, so the physical workplace. What do you need to do to create a kinder workplace? And I say they're the 4 C's you need. Comfort, good design. Since the pandemic, a lot of companies are trying to get people back into the office. Good design is one way of doing it. And why does that work so much? Because architecture design has an effect on our mental health. We call it neuroarchitecture. And for a lot of people, how you design your office, how it looks, is really a body language. So when someone comes in, a customer or the workers, it sends a signal. The second C is communication. How do we get people to communicate more? People don't hang around the water dispenser anymore. People are now being trained as baristas in their companies. But why is that important to bring people together? It's because the work space has changed, the work landscape has changed. So the hours that we work are much more desynchronized. Many people still do home office. we're more mobile, flexible work schemes, and we have a lot of freelancers. So we have less shared time together. Next one is the third C, collaboration. I've come across a few companies who said, how can we get people to be more creative, to learn new skills? And they've built actually a kitchen in their workplace and got people at lunchtime to cook for each other, cook together. I call it the Coffis. And why is that important? Why does that help? What we know again is that in this digital age, we're getting more and more that we need a counter trend, that we need the authentic, that we need this human connectivity and human experience. Then we have community. How do we build community in our companies? And why do we need to build a community? We need to build community because we live in a very individualistic society. A lot of people are lonely. It's a bit of a taboo theme. People don't like to talk about it. But if you study how you build community, really a strong community in a company, you'll notice that companies that have a strong community have more engaged workers. The workers are more likely to stay in their job, and they're actually healthier. So how do we get to a kinder economy? Is it just about being nice to people sitting next to you? Is it just about being nice to your customers? And what can we really do? And one of the things we can do, I believe, is we can create new jobs. For example, we could create a world where we have a chief kindness officer in every company. I went to Sweden to visit a co-working, co-living space, and they were showing me around, and I said, oh, well, where's your concierge, or where's your manager? They said, oh, we don't have that. You know, what the Scandinavians are like. They're very modern. They said, oh, no, we have a chief happiness officer, which I think is a very nice form, a bit like having a chief kindness officer. Another way would be to say we can create a kind of certification. Now, there's a lot of different certification, you know, how green you are, what you're doing. For example, are you a B corporation? And I think if anything gets close to being a certification for the kindness economy, it's the benefit corporation. A lot of companies are signing up. You have to go through a very rigorous process to get your company sort of analyzed. You have to prove all sorts of things, that you're doing things for social sustainability and ecological sustainability. But the whole idea is that this certification helps your brand, helps push your brand. And there are many companies worldwide, even big companies like Rituals and Nespresso, who have signed up, who are part of this community. Another way, I think, is often to try something different. When I talk to people about the kindness economy, they say, oh, no, it sounds like too much hard work. Or they just want to do what they've always done, this kind of typical linear thinking. But I think a bit like Yvonne Chouinard, to rebel a bit and say, why don't I just try something different? Find out what's important to you, what your values are, and how you can translate that into your company. Don't always listen to what other people tell you is important. For example, nice example of that is Jane Fraser of the Citigroup. There's this period where everyone on Wall Street was saying, right, everyone has to be back in the office 5 days a week, or probably 6 days a week there, or they lose their job. She rebelled. She said, no, I'm not going to do it just because everyone else tells me I should be doing it. And her staff are allowed to work remotely at least 2 days a week. Another way is maybe the 4-day week. Now, this is a trend that is actually, for a lot of business people, quite scary. When I say the 4-day week is a way to motivate people, it's a way to create a kinder workplace. They say, oh, no, we couldn't do that in our business. But there was a really interesting experiment with the Financial Times. The Financial Times newspaper in the UK worked with about 20 companies over 2 years. And they said, okay, try what it happens when you do a 4-day week. The idea is that everybody gets the same wages. So you don't get paid less. You get the same wages, but you only work 4 days of the week. And they found out at the end of the experiment that there were 18 companies that said, it worked beautifully, we're going to stay with it. And these were everything from a big company to like a big sportswear company, right down to a fish and chip shop. So they tried a whole range of companies. And they found that there were a lot of benefits of a 4-day work week. There was higher productivity in the company, improved efficiency, the people had better work-life balance, there was more teamwork, whereas you would think it would be the opposite, but they had to organize themselves better, they had to be more agile, and there were lower overheads because you didn't need so many workspaces. So it actually was a very positive experience, and now 200 companies in the UK have now signed up to use the 4-day week as a model for the future. When we think about business, we always see this term KPIs, key performance indicators. That's always the sort of measurement of how you say a company is doing well or not. We do need the classic key performance indicators, of course, to measure certain values, to measure profit, to measure turnover. But I think we need in the future kindness performance indicators. We need new ways to measure how happy the people are. And I think every company can work out for themselves, maybe put together a white paper, say, what kind of kindness performance indicators could there be? When I was researching these, I found all sorts of strange examples. There's a company in China, for example, and they allow their workers, if they wake up in the morning and say, I feel really miserable, that they can call and say, this is one of my I feel miserable days. So they're allowed 2 or 3 of those days a year. Another company brought a horoscope reader in as a kind of once a week so that the people could go and have their fortune told, which is, yeah. Or people who don't have children said, I need days off to look after my dog. Because it does seem a bit unfair that people who have children get to look after their children when they're sick, but what about if you have a sick dog at home? So they had doggy care days as well in the contract. So there's all sorts of different ways, but it is, of course, very hard to measure kindness. There was a really good article in The Economist. Now, The Economist, of course, is one of the leading voices for what's happening in the economy. They did a big article on, should you be kind at work? And the end was basically the end, the Schluss word was, so to speak, kindness, they found out, is not a management doctrine, but its absence is a management failure, which I think is a very strong words from The Economist. And they even wrote the title of the article, Kindness is in Vogue. So what else can we do to get kindness sort of on the agenda, to bring kindness into the economy? I think we have to start much earlier. I think we have to start with the next generation. I think we have to teach kindness. I mean, it's a hard thing to teach. I'm Irish, and I spend half of my time in Ireland, and I was reading the paper recently, and I saw that they've introduced in schools a special program for teaching kindness. Every school child in Ireland has to do a 12-week course. It's called Activating Social Empathy. They do little classes, they do little experiments, they work in teams. It's a very lively, interesting part of the curriculum. It's actually supported by Cillian Murphy. He's one of the people behind the program, as well as the University of Galway. And it's become very successful, it's become very popular. And the other person who worked on it, Pat Dolan from the University of Galway, said, his idea is to say, basically, it's very important that we teach children kindness. It comes naturally, but we can still teach them how to use it. He says it's as important as learning maths and English. And the way our society is going, he thinks we're going to be dependent on empathy in the future. So where do these kids go? What they've learned about empathy? What about students? What about the next level? So maybe if these children from Ireland went to Sweden, they could join the Stockholm School of Economics. At the Stockholm School of Economics, they have the world's first professor of happiness. So he teaches a course that every student has to take. So when you sign up to study economics in Stockholm, you have to do his course with this professor of happiness. He looks a bit scary. He's covered in tattoos, but he seems very happy. But what are the goals of his course? The goals of his course are quite simple. It's to teach that economics is about more than wealth. It's to shape policy making of the future. It's to guide companies in new measures to enhance productivity and profitability. He wants to teach them what makes a healthy economy. And also, very importantly, how companies can contribute to people's welfare. So I think that's something that maybe other colleges, other universities could teach. Make it mandatory that people have to do a course with a happiness professor or a kindness professor. I think when we think about the future, we need new storytelling. What helps us to imagine the future are stories, narratives. There's a very good book by Robert Shiller called Narrative Economics. What he says is that narratives help the economy. Narratives are memes, the cultural genes that we pass on through society, the stories that we tell each other about what makes a successful company, what makes a successful business. So think of Yvon Chouinard. He wanted to tell everyone about how he was creating a successful business. Just a lot of the other businesses didn't want to know. But now his message is out there in his book. He was creating a new narrative. Often when we think about the future, we're standing in today. We're standing today and looking into the future. And the future seems a little bit almost a bit fuzzy. It's not very clear. This is a typical way we think when we think about the future, prognosis. I think what will help us to try and imagine a kind of economy is we try something called regnosis. What we do is we picture ourselves in the future and think back to today. And how do we get there? What kind of steps do we need? So we imagine where we are in the future, how it feels, how it looks, how we're behaving, or how we want our economy or our business to be. And what the point about regnosis is it makes us think differently about the future. My husband, he says always that this idea of regnosis is a kind of retroactive embarrassment. So, I mean, what he always says is that in 10 years' time, it will be really embarrassing to have driven around with exhaust pipes, cars with petrol and diesel. I think it would take more than 10 years, to be honest. But maybe using this way of thinking, think of your business or your work in 15 years. Will you think back and think, oh, how embarrassing, or that I didn't become a kind company? So I'd like to just finish with one narrative, which I think in a way can help us think how to create these new storytelling. By the way, there is actually in Sweden, they're always so far ahead of us, they actually have in the government, they have a chief storyteller, and he helps the population imagine how they want to live in the future. And then he helps try and implement the policies. So what about a kind city of the future? I'd just like to leave you with an idea or an image, a story or a narrative of the kind city of the future. A city is also an economic system. A successful city, a buzzing city, is a healthy economic system. But how can we really imagine a kind city of the future? There was a very nice interview with the president of the German architectural chamber, Andrea Geberhardt, and someone asked her, how do you imagine the kind city of the future? And she said, a kind city of the future is where a 4-year-old child can go on their own to buy ice cream. I don't know if any of you here have 4-year-olds. Anyone have a 4-year-old? Can you imagine a city of the future try to picture yourself, this idea of regnosis, to put yourself into the future, think, how would that city have to look? How would it have to feel? How would it have to smell? Would there be cars? Would there be more trees? How safe would it be? This is the way we build up our thinking about the future, with this form of storytelling, of new narratives. And when it comes to kindness, I think we have to know there isn't really one formula. We can all try to be kind in our own way. We can maybe find a chief kindness officer for our company. And I think any company that is trying to be kind, what unites them is that we just want to work towards a better and a kinder future for everyone. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.